The morning sun peeked through the windows of the Golden Cup diner, painting warm stripes across the checkered floor tiles. May balanced 3 steaming plates along her arm with the skill of a tightrope walker, dodging between tables in the busy breakfast rush. Steam rose from fresh coffee cups as the smell of maple syrup and bacon filled the air. "Order up," called Ray from the kitchen window, his voice mixing with the cheerful chatter of regular customers and the gentle clink of silverware. May grabbed 2 more plates, somehow making it look effortless after 15 years of practice. Her comfortable black shoes carried her swiftly between tables as she delivered pancakes to the elderly couple in booth 3 and eggs over easy to the truck driver who stopped by every Wednesday. The diner had become her second home, though it wasn't the one she'd dreamed of as a little girl. Back then, she'd imagined herself sitting at grand pianos in concert halls, her fingers dancing across ivory keys while audiences held their breath. Now her fingers danced across the diner's worn counter instead, tapping out silent melodies only she could hear. During quiet moments between the breakfast and lunch rush, Mee's mind would drift to the upright piano waiting in her small apartment. It wasn't much. A second-hand Baldwin with slightly yellow keys and a few sticky notes. But it was hers. Every night after her shift, she would sit there for hours, composing pieces that spoke of dreams and determination, of busy diners and quiet dawns. "Hey, sweetie, could I get a refill?" called Mr. Kim from his usual spot by the window. He was one of her regulars, always reading his morning paper and drinking cup after cup of coffee. Mai smiled and grabbed the coffee pot, remembering how he'd once heard her humming while she worked. "You've got music in your soul," he told her that day. He wasn't wrong. Music had been her constant companion since childhood, when her grandmother first taught her to play on their old family piano. Even now, she heard symphonies in the everyday sounds of the diner, the rhythmic chopping from the kitchen, the swoosh of the front door, the harmonious chaos of dozens of conversations blending together. Life had taken an unexpected turn when her father had his stroke. She'd been just months away from starting at the music conservatory, her acceptance letter still fresh in her hands, when everything changed. The diner job was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to help with medical bills and family expenses. Somehow, temporary had stretched into 15 years. Between serving plates and refilling coffee cups, Mee kept her dreams alive in small ways. She'd prop her phone against the napkin holder during slow afternoons, watching videos of famous pianists performing. During her breaks, she'd scribble musical notes on spare order tickets, composing melodies that played endlessly in her head. The regulars had become like family over the years. There was Mrs. Lee, who always ordered the same thing: dry toast and a soft-boiled egg, and asked about May's father's health. The morning construction crew who filled the corner booth, their hearty laughter adding a deep bass line to the diner's daily symphony. Even grumpy Mr. Chen, who complained about everything except Mee's service, had become a familiar part of her daily routine. Behind the counter, Mai moved with practiced efficiency, her movements almost like a dance. Pour coffee, serve plates, clear tables, repeat. But unlike many who'd grown tired of the routine, she found rhythm in it. Every task was like a note in a larger composition, playing out day after day. At 32, she wasn't the same starry-eyed teenager who'd once dreamed of concert halls. Life had taught her about responsibility, about putting family first, about finding beauty in unexpected places. But somewhere between the coffee refills and breakfast specials, she'd never completely let go of that dream. It lived in the melodies she composed late at night, in the songs she hummed while working, in the way her fingers still danced across any flat surface as if it were piano keys. The morning rush was beginning to slow down when Ray called out another order. May tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, straightened her apron, and headed back to the kitchen. Another day was unfolding at the Golden Cup diner, and with it, another chance to find music in the mundane, to discover beauty in the ordinary, and to keep her dreams alive 1 cup of coffee at a time. It started as just another busy lunch rush at the Golden Cup diner. The summer heat had driven in more customers than usual, all seeking refuge in the air-conditioned comfort of the familiar restaurant. Mai moved swiftly between tables, her order pad filling up with requests for cold drinks and fresh salads. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked an elegant older woman Mai had never seen before. There was something different about her. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or perhaps the thoughtful look in her eyes as she surveyed the busy diner. She chose a small table near the window, setting down a leather bag that looked well-traveled but expensive. "Good afternoon," May greeted, placing a menu and a glass of water on the table. "Welcome to Golden Cup." The woman looked up with warm brown eyes and smiled. "Thank you. It's quite lively in here today." "The heat brings everyone inside," Mad replied, automatically reaching for her coffee pot. "Would you like some coffee? We can serve it iced if you prefer." "Hot coffee would be lovely, thank you." The woman's voice had a musical quality to it, reminding Mai of the gentle notes of a well-played piano. As Mai poured the coffee, she noticed the woman's hands. Elegant fingers with slightly swollen knuckles, the kind that came from years of dedicated practice at something. While juggling orders for other tables, Mai found herself drawn back to the mysterious customer. There was something about her that seemed to fill the ordinary diner with an air of possibility, like the moment before a conductor raises their baton. As Mai cleared away the woman's empty plate later, she caught herself humming one of her own compositions, something she usually tried not to do at work. It was a habit she'd picked up during long shifts, letting bits of music escape when she thought no one was paying attention. "That melody," the woman said suddenly, making Mai freeze mid-reach for a dirty cup. "I don't recognize it. What is it?" Mai felt her cheeks warm. "Oh, it's nothing really. Just something that's been stuck in my head." The woman's eyes sparkled with interest. "Did you compose it yourself?" The question caught Mai off guard. Most customers asked about the daily specials or complained about their coffee being too hot or too cold. Nobody had ever noticed her humming, let alone recognized it as an original piece. Yes, Mai admitted, stacking plates to keep her hands busy. "It's just something I work on in my free time." "I'm Lynn," the woman said, introducing herself with a slight bow of her head. "I spent 40 years as a concert pianist before retiring." Music has a way of finding kindred spirits, doesn't it? Mai nearly dropped the plates she was holding. A concert pianist? Here at her diner? She looked at Lynn's hands again, suddenly understanding the story they told. Years of scales, countless hours of practice, the joy and discipline of a life dedicated to music. "I'm me," she managed to say, her heart beating faster. "I've always loved piano, but—" She gestured at the busy diner around them, letting the scene explain what words couldn't. "But life had other plans." Lynn finished gently. "I understand. Though I wonder—" She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "Would you tell me more about your composition? The melody has quite an interesting structure." Before Mai could respond, Ray's voice called out from the kitchen. "Order up." "I have to." Mi gestured apologetically toward the kitchen. "Of course," Lynn smiled, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a business card and placed it on the table. "I'll be here for a while longer. Perhaps when things quiet down." Throughout the rest of her shift, Mai felt like she was floating. She continued her usual routine, refilling coffee cups, taking orders, delivering plates, but everything felt different. It was as if Lynn's presence had cracked open a window in her world, letting in a fresh breeze of possibility. Every few minutes, Mai would glance over at Lynn's table, where the elegant woman sat with her coffee, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. She seemed in no hurry to leave, as if she had all the time in the world to wait for the right moment. The lunch rush gradually died down, dirty dishes were cleared away, and the diner settled into its peaceful afternoon lull. Mai felt the weight of Lynn's business card in her apron pocket. Like a key to a door, she thought had been locked forever. As she wiped down a nearby table, she could hear the faint melody of her composition playing in her head, no longer just a secret between her and her apartment walls. Maybe, just maybe, this ordinary Tuesday afternoon would turn out to be not so ordinary after all. Over the next few weeks, Lynn became as much a part of the Golden Cup diner as the old jukebox in the corner. She would arrive precisely at 2 o'clock, after the lunch rush had settled, always requesting the small table by the window. The other regulars began to notice how Me's eyes would light up whenever the elegant woman walked in, how their conversations would stretch beyond the usual small talk about weather and coffee refills. Today, Lynn had brought something with her, a sleek tablet propped against the sugar dispenser. "Show me," she said simply, her eyes twinkling with encouragement. "Show me what you've been creating all these years." Me's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. For 15 years, her compositions had been her secret companions, living only in her head and in rough recordings made late at night when the rest of the world was asleep. Sharing them felt like showing someone her diary. "They're not very professional," Mai warned, scrolling through her phone's music folder. "I just record them on my old piano at home." Lynn waved away her concerns. The best music comes from the heart, not from fancy recording studios. Mai selected her favorite piece, a gentle melody that seemed to dance between hope and melancholy. She had composed it during her father's recovery, in those quiet hours when she sat beside his hospital bed. Through her phone's tiny speaker, the piano notes filled their little corner of the diner. Lynn closed her eyes, her fingers moving slightly on the table as if following the music. Other customers glanced over curiously. This wasn't the usual diner soundtrack of clinking plates and coffee machine hisses. Even Ray poked his head out from the kitchen, spatula in hand. When the piece ended, Lynn opened her eyes. To Me's surprise, they were glistening with tears. "My dear," she said softly, "do you have any idea what you've created here?" Before Mai could respond, Lynn pulled up something on her tablet. "Listen to this," she said, turning the screen so Mai could see. It was a recording of a famous symphony orchestra performing a classical piece. "Do you hear the way the melody builds? The conversation between instruments?" She played another clip from Mai's recording. "You've done the same thing here, instinctively. This is raw talent, shaped by real emotion and life experience." Mai felt her cheeks grow warm. No one had ever analyzed her music before, had never treated it as anything more than a hobby. "I never had proper training," she admitted. "Just some basic lessons when I was young, and whatever I could teach myself." "Which makes this even more remarkable," Lynn insisted. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out some papers. "I have connections with the City Symphony Orchestra. They're hosting a composition competition next month. The winner gets a scholarship to study composition at the conservatory." Me's heart skipped a beat. The conservatory, the same one she'd had to give up all those years ago. "I couldn't possibly." "You can," Lynn said firmly, "and you should. Talent like yours deserves to be heard." Just then, Mr. Kim called from his usual spot. "Hey, May, is that your music? It's beautiful." Mrs. Lee chimed in from her booth. "I always knew you were special, dear. You light up the whole place with your smile." Mai felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention, by the way her private world of music was spilling into her everyday life at the diner. Ray appeared with a fresh pot of coffee, topping up Lynn's cup with a knowing smile. "Our May's got magic in her fingers," he declared proudly. "Even her coffee pours have rhythm." Lynn reached across the table and squeezed Me's hand. "You see, music finds its way out, one way or another. Maybe it's time to give it the space it deserves." That evening, after her shift ended, Mai sat at her old piano. The competition entry form lay on the music stand, still blank. Her fingers found their place on the keys, and she began to play. Not one of her old pieces, but something new. It was a melody about change and courage, about dreams that refuse to die, about finding unexpected mentors in unexpected places. Outside her window, the city hummed its own symphony of traffic and voices and life. For the first time in years, Mai felt like her own song might finally become part of that larger music. The competition entry form sat on Mi's kitchen table for 3 days, untouched. Every time she passed by, it seemed to whisper of possibilities and changes. But change, she had learned long ago, wasn't always simple, especially when other people depended on you. Her tiny apartment felt especially cramped that evening as she tried to practice. The walls that had kept her music safe for so many years now felt like they were closing in. Her younger sister Lily was coming over for dinner, and Mi's stomach churned with anxiety about the conversation ahead. The doorbell rang just as Mai was pulling a simple stir-fry off the stove. Lily breezed in, looking polished in her lawyer's suit, carrying a bag of their father's favorite dumplings. "I stopped by Dad's on the way," she said, giving Mai a warm hug. "He's doing really well with his new physical therapy exercises." They settled at the small table, the competition form tucked safely away in a drawer. But Maya couldn't stop thinking about it, about Lynn's words, about the way her heart raced whenever she imagined performing her music for others. "You're quiet tonight," Lily observed, picking up a piece of broccoli with her chopsticks. "Everything okay at the diner?" Mai pushed her rice around her plate. "Actually, something's happened." She told her sister about Lynn, about the competition, about the possibility of studying at the conservatory. The words tumbled out like notes in a rushed melody. "Me." Lily's eyes lit up. "This is amazing. It's like the universe is giving you a second chance at your dream." "But what about Dad? The diner? I can't just—" "Stop right there," Lily interrupted, putting down her chopsticks. "Do you remember what Dad said when you first gave up music school to help us?" Mai shook her head. "He cried. Not because he needed your help, but because you were giving up something precious. He never wanted that for you." The words hit Mai like a physical force. She remembered those days after his stroke, how determined she'd been to be the responsible one, to make sure everything stayed stable. "But the medical bills are mostly paid off now," Lily finished. "And I'm doing well at the firm. We can figure this out, big sister. Maybe it's time someone took care of you for a change." Later that night, after Lily left, Mai sat at her piano. Her fingers found the keys, playing a melody she'd composed years ago when her father first came home from the hospital. It was a piece about family, about sacrifice, about love that holds together even when everything else falls apart. The next morning at the diner, everything looked different. She noticed things she'd stopped seeing years ago. How Mr. Kim's hands shook slightly as he held his coffee cup. How Mrs. Lee's eyes crinkled with pride when she talked about her grandchildren. How Ray hummed old love songs while he cooked. During her break, she pulled out her phone and listened to her recordings again. Each piece was like a photograph, capturing moments of her life. The quiet nights after long shifts, the mornings watching sunrise through the diner windows, the afternoons helping her father relearn to write his name. "Your coffee's getting cold," a familiar voice said. Lynn had arrived early, catching Maya lost in thought at the counter. "I'm scared," Maya admitted quietly, looking at her mentor. "What if I'm too old to start over? What if I try and fail?" Lynn's laugh was gentle. "Did you know I gave my first public performance at age 40? Everyone said I was too old then, too. But music doesn't care about numbers. It only cares about what's in your heart." That evening, Mai pulled out the competition form again. Her hands were steady as she began to fill it out. Through her open window, she could hear the city sounds she'd grown to love. Traffic and voices, laughter and life. They weren't interruptions to her music anymore. They were part of it, just as the diner's rhythms and her family's love had always been part of her story. Maybe, she thought, it wasn't about choosing between two worlds. Maybe it was about finding a way to bring them together in a new kind of harmony. Time took on a different rhythm after Mai submitted her competition entry. Her small apartment became a sanctuary of creativity, with music sheets spread across every surface and melodies floating through the air at all hours. The old upright piano, which had been her silent confidant for so many years, now sang daily with new purpose and energy. Between diner shifts, Mai would rush home to practice, her uniform still carrying the scent of coffee and pancakes. Lynn had helped her structure a practice schedule that fit around her work hours. Music adapts to life, Lynn would say, watching Mi's fingers dance across the keys during their morning lessons. Just like you've been doing all these years. The diner's owner, Mr. Zhang, surprised everyone by adjusting Mi's schedule when he learned about the competition. My mother was a singer in the old country, he revealed one quiet afternoon. She always said that talent is a gift you must unwrap carefully. He moved her to shorter shifts, giving her more time to prepare. The regular customers became her unexpected cheerleaders. Mrs. Lee brought her special tea for her throat, insisting that musicians needed to stay healthy. Mr. Kim would share stories about his daughter's ballet performances, understanding the pressure of preparing for a big show. Even Ray started timing his cooking to match the rhythm of Mai's humming. One evening, as Mai worked on her competition piece, her father came to visit. He moved slower now since his stroke, but his eyes were as bright as ever. He sat quietly in her apartment's only comfortable chair, listening to her play. "That sound," he said during a pause, his words careful and measured. "It's like hearing your heart speak." Since his stroke, he chose his words with precision, making each one count. "It reminds me of your mother's laugh." Mi's hands froze above the keys. Her mother had passed away when she was young, leaving behind only scattered memories and a few old photographs. "Really?" He nodded, smiling. "She always said music was like magic. It could make time stop or fly, make people cry or dance." He reached out and patted her hand. "She would be so proud to see you now." The competition piece began to take shape, growing more complex with each passing day. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was her story, their story. She wove in the sounds of early morning deliveries at the diner, the gentle clicking of her father's walking cane, the warm laughter of her sister, the wise words of Lynn. Each note carried a memory, a moment, a piece of the path that had led her here. Late one night, while practicing a particularly challenging section, Mai heard a knock at her door. It was her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Wu, who had been listening through the walls for weeks. "I brought you dinner," she said, holding out a container of homemade soup. "Artists need to eat too." She hesitated, then added, "My husband used to play violin. When you play, it reminds me of him." The days grew shorter as autumn approached, and the competition drew nearer. Lynn spent more time at the diner, not just giving advice about music, but sharing stories from her own journey. "Every performer feels fear," she told Mai. "The trick is to make friends with it. Let it remind you that you're doing something brave." 1 week before the competition, Mai played her piece for her diner family after closing time. They arranged the chairs in rows, cleared space near the counter, and listened intently as her music filled the space that had held her other dreams for so long. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then Ray started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Mrs. Lee was wiping tears from her eyes, and Mr. Zhang was beaming like a proud father. Now that, Mr. Kim declared, was worth waiting 15 years to hear. That night, as Mai walked home under the city lights, she felt different. The weight of her dream no longer felt like a burden. It had become a wing, lifting her higher with each step. The city's nighttime symphony of distant sirens, gentle wind, and humming streetlights seemed to whisper, "Sometimes the longest wait makes the sweetest music." The concert hall loomed before Mai like something from her old dreams. Its grand architecture and gleaming windows reflected the setting sun, turning the whole building golden. She stood on the steps, clutching her music folder, while people in elegant evening wear streamed past her into the building. Inside the performers' waiting area, Other musicians paced nervously or sat in quiet concentration. Most were younger, many fresh from music school, their fingers tapping out silent rhythms on their knees. Mai felt out of place in her simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, bought specially for tonight. "Your hands are cold," Lin said, appearing beside her like a guardian angel. "Remember to breathe." She pressed a cup of warm tea into Mei's hands. The familiar scent helped calm her racing heart. Through the backstage door, Mai could hear the murmur of the gathering audience. She peeked out and her breath caught. There in the middle section sat her entire diner family. Mr. Zhang had closed the restaurant early, something he'd never done before. Ray had traded his cooking apron for a suit that looked like it had been waiting years for a special occasion. Mrs. Lee sat between Mr. Kim and Mei's father, all three of them beaming with anticipation. 5 minutes, called the stage manager, making Mei's stomach flutter. Lin squeezed her hand. "Tell me again," she said softly. "What is your piece about?" Mei closed her eyes, picturing her morning walks to work, the sunrise painting the city streets gold. She thought of countless cups of coffee poured, thousands of kind words exchanged, years of dreams kept alive in quiet moments between orders. "It's about finding extraordinary magic in ordinary moments," she answered. "About how every day contains its own kind of music, if you listen carefully enough." Lin nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then that's all you need to share tonight. Just let them hear what you've been hearing all these years." When they called her name, Mai walked onto the stage with steady steps. The grand piano waited for her, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights. It was much bigger than her old upright at home, but as she sat down, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Her fingers found their place on the keys, and for a moment, she was back in her tiny apartment, playing just for herself. Then she began, and the music flowed out like a story finally being told. The piece started simply, like early morning sunshine creeping through city windows. Then came the sounds of awakening. The rhythm of footsteps on busy streets, the melody of voices calling good morning, the harmony of 100 small kindnesses exchanged over steaming coffee cups. As she played, she felt every moment that had led her here. The weight of responsibility that had kept her from music school became a deep, resonant bass line, supporting rather than holding back. The years of serving others transformed into flowing arpeggios, each note a small act of care. Her father's stroke, her sister's support, Lin's guidance, all of it woven together in a complex tapestry of sound. The middle section captured the controlled chaos of the lunch rush. Multiple themes playing against each other, building in intensity, then suddenly giving way to a quiet afternoon lull. The finale brought everything together, hope and hesitation, dreams deferred and dreams reborn, all rising in a crescendo that felt like sunrise breaking through clouds. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Mai opened her eyes, not realizing she had closed them. Then the applause began, starting slowly and building until it filled the entire hall. As she stood to bow, she caught sight of her father in the audience. He was crying openly, clapping with his good hand against his leg. Next to him, her sister was on her feet, cheering. The entire diner crew had formed their own cheering section, with Ray whistling loudly enough to be heard over the applause. But it was the faces she didn't know that struck her most. The critics in the front row leaning forward with interest, the competition judges writing rapidly in their notebooks, the other audience members wiping away tears or smiling in understanding. In that moment, Mei realized something profound. Her music hadn't just been waiting all these years. It had been growing, gathering richness from every experience, every person, every moment of joy or struggle. Like a fine wine, it had needed this time to become exactly what it was meant to be. The results of the competition arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, carried in on the autumn breeze that rustled through the diner's wind chimes. Mai was refilling coffee cups when Lin walked in, clutching an official-looking envelope. "Open it," Lin urged, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Mi's hands trembled as she tore open the envelope, the regular customers watching with held breath. Her eyes scanned the letter, once, twice, making sure she understood every word. She hadn't won first place, but as she read further, her heart began to race. The judges had created a special recognition award, praising the unique perspective and emotional depth of her composition. Along with it came an offer, a part-time position at the conservatory's community music program, where she could both teach and study. "They want me to teach," Mai whispered, hardly believing the words. "But I never finished my own training." "That's exactly why they want you," Lin explained, beaming with pride. "Your music speaks to people who've had to put their dreams on hold. You can show them it's never too late." The news spread through the diner like wildfire. Ray emerged from the kitchen with an impromptu celebration cake, slightly lopsided, but made with love. Mrs. Lee called everyone she knew on her phone, proudly announcing that her waitress was going to be a music teacher. Mr. Kim insisted on buying coffee for everyone in the diner to celebrate. A week later, Mr. Zhang called Mai into his office. She worried he might be upset about her needing to reduce her hours, but instead, he had an idea. "Sunday mornings are usually slow," he said, gesturing around his small office. "What if we tried something different?" And that's how the Golden Cup's classical Sunday brunch was born. They moved the old upright piano from Mai's apartment into the diner, placing it near the window where Lin had first sat. Every Sunday, while customers enjoyed their breakfast, the diner filled with music, sometimes Mai's compositions, sometimes pieces she was learning at the conservatory, and eventually songs played by her own students. Her first student was Mrs. Wu's granddaughter, a shy 12-year-old who'd been secretly listening through the walls all those years. Then came Mr. Kim's nephew, who'd always wanted to learn but thought he was too old. Soon, Mi's Sunday afternoons were filled with lessons, the diner becoming a place where music and dreams could grow together. The conservatory classes were challenging, especially after long shifts at the diner. But Mi discovered that everything she'd learned in those 15 years of waiting tables had prepared her in unexpected ways. Her ability to handle pressure, to juggle multiple tasks, to read people's needs. It all translated into her new life as a musician and teacher. One particularly busy Sunday morning, Mai took a moment to look around the transformed diner. Her father sat in his usual spot, proudly sharing stories with customers about his daughter's music. Lin was at her favorite table, mentoring a young composer just as she had mentored Mai. Ray had learned to time his cooking so the sizzle of the grill became part of the music rather than competing with it. As she played, sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee in the air, Mai realized something beautiful. She hadn't had to choose between her two worlds after all. Instead, they had melted together, creating something entirely new and unexpectedly wonderful. Her latest composition, inspired by this realization, was called Morning Symphony. It captured the magic of dreams coming true in unexpected ways. The sound of coffee brewing mixing with piano notes, the rhythm of footsteps blending with melodies, the harmony of ordinary moments transformed by love and persistence. That evening, after the last customer had left and the sun was setting, Mai sat at the piano playing softly. The diner's lights cast a warm glow, and outside, the city was settling into its nighttime rhythm. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, not to a grand concert hall, but to this perfect place between her old life and her new dreams. Some dreams, she thought, her fingers dancing across the familiar keys, don't need to take you away from home. Sometimes they lead you right back where you started, but with new eyes and a fuller heart. And in that moment, as music filled the quiet diner and stars began appearing in the city sky, Mai knew that her symphony wasn't ending. It was just beginning its sweetest movement yet.